Welcome, Lorraine, to our Leaders Who Care series. It's great to have you here.
Nice to meet you and talk with you, Mark, as well.
I've been thinking of having you on this for a while, ever since I first met, now I'm going to forget her name, the president of Catalyst Canada a few years back.
Deborah Gillis, is that who it
Yeah,
is?
and and then I was and then I looked up and I saw that you were the CEO of the whole thing, and I said, got to get her and to talk to her and everything. And now finally got the chance on this series to do it. So this should be fun, and at least I'm looking for it to be fun. And if you could start by briefly introducing yourself, mostly about who you are, where you're from, family. We'll get to the business part. Something you've never told anybody ever, and you want to release it now. You could do that too if you want. You know. So yeah, please.
Well, I'm Lorraine Harriton. Currently, I'm the CEO of Catalyst. I grew up in New York, but spent a lot of time in the Bay Area as a tech executive in Silicon Valley. But I've also been in government, and now I'm in the nonprofit sector. So, I've had a diverse career. I'm also, actually a grandmother of three kids under five, which
Oh
is
wow.
really fun, and I'm really enjoying that. And I'm also a big biker and like to do a lot of outdoorsy types of things. So there you have it. I'm actually into pickleball right now. So
Really?
that's the really the new thing.
It is the new thing. I'm on the surplus list to play pickleball here in California. It's gotten so popular. It's unbelievable.
I know now you can't get in, right? I live in Manhattan, but I formed a pickleball group, and we play pickleball. Right, we changed some handball courts into pickleball courts, so that's what we do.
We'll have to have a an LA New York tournament or something of pickleball. It's great that you cycle. I actually owned a cycling team at one point in Miami
Wow.
that was part of the National Cycling League, but that's another story for wine or something. We'll talk, on type of thing. So, can you describe your life as a kid and as a teenager? Where did you spend your time at? Where did your imagination go?
Well, I tell you, just some things about when I was a kid that have shaped my life. I was dyslexic, and so I was very, in a sense, bipolar, very organized, very good at certain things, but reading and words, I was very good at numbers, and so I was a little awkward as a kid. So it led me into the type of work got into, which is in the computer industry, which turned out to be great. It also built a lot of resiliency. But I would say that as a kid, I've evolved a lot. I don't think they would have had me as miss successful when I was a kid, because I had a lot of things that I had to overcome in terms of really finding out what my strengths were and coming into my own.
I think it's amazing. I'm not a psychologist by a long shot, but I always find it in interviewing so many people how much who they were did impact who they became. And it sounds logical, but not always type of thing. Like, somebody who they thought never would have this or that or the other. Somebody who was like quote unquote a geek or somebody whatever. And or somebody, and I get this with men a lot, if the coach put them into a game near the end of the game, just the fact the coach believed in them to put them in the end of the game, they hold on to it the rest of their life as like, man, he really believed in me, you know?
Well, I think that's sponsors and mentors can make a big difference at the right moment in someone's life. Now, my mother passed away about a month ago. So, and we just had the memorial service this Saturday. So I've had an opportunity to reflect on her life and how she shaped me. So I realized that, role models can make a real big difference in all this.
Yeah, I'll ask you about influencers later, and I have a feeling I know one that's going to be one right now.
We'll talk about that. Yes.
So your journey, you were in math and computer science, you were in large corporate and venture firms. Is that when you discovered the infamous why?
Why?
Yeah, is that when you discovered what your why really was at that point, or not yet?
Yeah, well, I think my purpose, is that what you're saying? The why means, evolved over time. I was a woman in tech in Silicon Valley because of my strengths in math. I ended up getting involved in computers when I was in college, and I transferred to Stanford. So I ended up being a woman in computer science in Stanford, in Silicon Valley, in the 70s. And that shaped my life. So then I ended up having, a multifaceted career in technology as a woman. And I think that over time that became another key focus and purpose. In the beginning, it was really my love for computers and using computers to make a difference in, impact in the world. Computers have obviously changed our lives majorly, but I also developed skill sets like, I moved from being a technology person to being a salesperson at IBM. And then so I developed all these sales skill sets. And I've been able to apply that in different places in the passion around women. But my passion around helping women advance in the workplace came out of my own personal experiences as a woman in the workplace, in technology in Silicon Valley in the 80s and 90s, and then the networks I developed and I started to get involved with this when I went into entrepreneurship, this group called the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs. I ended up first taking their courses, then going on their advisory board, then going on their board and become chair of their board. I ended up being involved with the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. And then when I finished doing another startup, I decided that I wanted to do something. I decided to help Hillary Clinton become president of the United States. And I became a big fundraiser for her. So I used all my sales skill sets. So this passion that I'm involved in right now, which is really, become my life passion around helping women in the workplace, was something that evolved from my own personal experience over that period of time.
Well, and that makes total sense. When you had amazing opportunities in government and nonprofits, creating partnerships. We used the U.S. Department of State, as you said, New York Academy of Sciences. Is that where you really saw the light, if you will, about how important it was to have diverse collaboration, creating all those partnerships, and as well as the value of equal opportunity?
Well, I mean, I have, I guess, since being a catalyst, really understood from an organizational structure standpoint, the importance of inclusion and diverse teams and what that's all about. My earlier focus was on how to advance individual women into positions of leadership. At the state, helping Hillary become president of the United States, which should be in a position of power. Then when I was at the State Department, I developed programs around entrepreneurship and women's entrepreneurship and women's business leadership. But Catalysts, the organization I'm running now, is really focused on how to build an inclusive workplace, how to develop diverse teams. The things that you're talking about are things that really, over the last 4 years, I've become really adept in understanding of what they were.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit. We launched Fifth Element at the UN, 4 years ago, on International Women's Day, with the Decade of Women initiative, and it seems to me, because I've been around a little bit too, that it's taken decades for leaders to recognize that using all their capital for social impact is really good for attracting and keeping talent, especially women and diversity individuals who look at that a lot. And obviously then it's good for business. When and what shift did you see with corporate leaders and the interactions that you've had?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And if you look at the history of Catalyst started in 1962. We've celebrated this year our 60th anniversary. So because of that, we've had an opportunity really, and I have had an opportunity to really look back at the whole history. And I'm a student of the women's movement in general. We actually have Catalyst archives are down at the Hagley Museum which is is down where DuPont is. It's the largest business history archives in the country, and they asked for Catalyst's archives, so we have them there. So I actually brought my whole team down there to celebrate our 60th on our actual anniversary. So when Catalyst was first formed, it was formed by a woman called named Felice Schwartz, and it was in 1962, and she was looking to see how she could go into the workplace and have a career job after she put her kids in school. And most women of that era, Felice, my mother, they they may have worked as a teacher or something before they had children, but when they had children, they weren't in the workplace. Women were not mothers and in the workplace. So they didn't perceive that they could go back into the workplace until their children were actually in school. It was not socially acceptable to do that. You had career women and you had mothers. So she wanted to go into the workplace after her kids were in school, and there were very limited choices. So she really focused on individual women and how they could fit into a very rigid environment that had been created. Over time, Catalyst, and we came to understand that the workplace needed to change if women are going to be effective at balancing career and family, and you were going to have more women in the workplace. So that has evolved, and Catalyst as an organization's evolved to help create the workplace that works for women, not just how we get women to fit into a culture that was not meant for them to be. So that's been an evolution. Now, corporations themselves, things have evolved. Women now represent more than 50% of the people who are graduating. Most women, educated women, have an expectation of balancing career and family. It's the culture has changed. Most people who are looking for companies that embrace diversity. A lot of these social issues are really important to Gen Z and millennials as they decide where they want to put their career paths. These social issues, whether it's climate change or diversity, these are really important to them. And then we also have a talent shortage right now. And human capital has become much more important to the overall capital structure of companies. Industrial companies have a lot of their assets in bricks and mortar, but more and more, we're in a digital society, so people are the key assets. Even the SEC is working on how do they measure human capital more effectively. The CHRO, the head of human resource service, has become a much more powerful position. It's not just it is key to creating the right type of environment to attract and return talent. So the diverse teams that mirror the population, that can bring that perspective, are critical. So, the companies that support Catalyst, especially the ones on my board who are really proactive, they really understand that key to competitiveness is to have diverse teams, to take advantage of all the talents, and putting the policies and practices and building the right type of culture that enables that.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I in interviewing, even now, we're doing the CEO search for National Women's History Museum, as I mentioned, but interviewing women for other positions all over the place. I found that it's one thing that women and even minorities mostly ask for, especially women. They say, well, I can do the job. We wouldn't have presented them if they couldn't do the job. But they ask the clients, are you going to allow me to be on the big projects in the company? Are you going to allow me to contribute? Are you going to allow me maybe to fail and fix it? Are you going to recognize me? And so, I can show my stuff. Describe, what you think the creating compelling experiences means for attracting and retaining really quality women into corporate.
I said women and diverse talent more generally. There's 4 things I like to talk about in terms of what it takes to really accomplish this. First of all is commitment at the top of the organization. At the CEO level, they set the tone of what's important. We're really talking about cultural change to drive change. Secondly, measuring what matters. You need to put a baseline that you measure representation, you measure pay, you measure things like retention and hiring. You have the measurement, and then you hold people accountable. And the best companies actually bonus on this like they would other financials. The third thing is to have the right type of policies and practices that allow women to be successful. So flexible work hours, paid family leave, having policies and practices like the Rooney Rule, that you make sure you're always having a diverse slate. Sponsorship type of programs. There's a whole range of policies and practices you can implement. And then the 4th area is how to build an inclusive culture, and that is really the hardest. How do you make people aware of unconscious bias, white male privilege in some ways. How do you have men be allies to help women move forward? How do you, interrupt these unconscious biases and sexism on, that permeate our culture? And, it's not that people are deliberately trying to do this. It's part of how they're raised and so, something called benevolent sexism that we have is, something like, I don't think we consider her. She just had a baby and I don't think she wants to move to Paris. Thank you very much, but maybe you should ask me before you decide that,
Right. It's funny you mentioned that. When I was at Deloitte, this is a long time ago, Deloitte's become a great company, but I had a lady that was my, senior manager, if you will, when I was in audit, and she got pregnant. You reminded me, I said a baby. She got pregnant. She had 5 clients. I worked on 3 of them for her. She had 5 clients. She came back and said, would it be okay if I worked on my 3 clients and you only have to transition 2 to someone else? And the answer was, we don't do that type of thing. And I was no genius, but I was trying to figure out, so she left, by the way. I was trying to figure out, how did it make sense business-wise? And now you have to transition 5 clients, you lose a great person, and you don't do that. Now,
well, that's a really good example. Flexibility, is really critical for women. And, we define flexibility in many different ways. We had a big experiment on physical flexibility in the pandemic, and now the expectation is to have more flexibility in where you work, how you work, and having that type of flexibility for job sharing and part-time, and even allowing people to come back, returnship programs. Right. There's a lot more flexibility than when I went into the workplace in the mid-70s, where, you really had a very rigid culture and you didn't dare even talk about the fact that you got pregnant and that might impact you. And we didn't even have paid family leave. We didn't have any of that. And this was at IBM. When I was pregnant with my first son, who was born in 1985, we had to order a maternity business suit to wear out of a catalog, and, I took, 8 weeks off. I was very careful about all that stuff because the culture was very rigid. So, we've come a long way. We still have a long way to go, but, we've certainly made progress.
Oh, without a doubt. And sometimes you look back and you say, how could you have been thinking that? Because, with the flexibility, there's so many opportunities for, not only inclusion, but knowledge and expertise and morale. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And, we talk a lot about well-being too. And there's financial well-being, physical well-being, and mental well-being. What role do you see current and even upcoming, what I would call women leaders who care, playing to ensure that all that well-being, is there for other women and for the families of employees, et cetera, in their companies?
Well, I'd like to go beyond women leaders. We, as I talked about before, human capital is critical. If you look at the stakeholders, most companies consider their human capital to be on par, or even maybe more important than their shareholders right now. And they're really focused on it. So I think that coming off the pandemic, there's a change in leadership style. And we talk about this: more empathetic, more adaptable, more humanistic. And so I think that that's something that all leaders need to understand and embrace. Now, some people would say that, women tend to be socialized, maybe inherently are more empathetic, have some of these skills, though empathy is a learned skill and people can develop it. So I don't like to, I don't like to stereotype. But I think that perhaps there'll be more opportunity to have a broader range of what leadership looks like, as we go forward. And you do executive search. Are people looking for a broader range of skills than they might have had 20 years ago in terms of what leadership looks like? I think that enlightened boards are looking for leadership that can embrace the importance of a humanistic approach to their talent.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I have an executive with Royal Bank of Canada, and he always told me he had his direct reports as much as possible, if possible, every day, go to their direct reports. And he said, don't stand at the door of their office and say, how's it going? Sit down. Don't stay too long because that's also no good, but sit down and say, how's it going, or something like that. And respect them, but not staying too long because they got work to do. But the fact, it was so interesting how we defined between standing at the door and saying it and sitting down and saying it to the person, even a small thing like that.
Well, I think that's right. And I think given that most people who are in non-physical jobs want to have much more flexibility. We are not going back to every day people in the office 10 hours a day. You know, they may come in some, and people, that adaptability is going to be a key part of being an effective manager, especially at the first line or departmental level. So if people don't understand the needs of their employees and can adapt the work schedule around that, they're not going to be effective at how they bring the team together.
Yeah, 100%. Two quick things I want to ask you about there is trust. Obviously, everybody talks about it. It's super important. With remote, as we're talking about now, which is here to stay, trust has had to increase, if that's the right word, tremendously, because you can't watch them. And you know, I compare a lot of things to sports. The player will do anything for the coach that trusts and believes in him. So how have you seen that changing in leadership, where they have to trust the people at home now?
Well, look, this is good leadership practice. It's always been good leadership practice to build strong trust, but now it's an imperative. So people have to lean into it. If not, they're not going to be effective in their jobs. So we do a training around empathy, around trust, those types of qualities that create, these, but they've always been really important part of being effective leaders.
Yeah, it's just harder for some people when they can't be sitting over your shoulder and all that stuff.
Well, something I think that for quite a few leaders, this is out of their comfort zone. They grew up in a certain way, and they're not going to change, and or they're going to learn the hard way. But I think that for many leaders, they're leaning into this and looking at it as a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I agree 100%. That's the smart ones. It's an opportunity, it's an advantage, etc. So last thing I want to ask you, a client told me during 2021, the client said to me, the year 2020, it seems like the year flew by slowly. And I said, what a great expression. So with that said, 2021 and 2022 seem to literally fly by also. What are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
Well, in terms of the work that I'm focused on, I think the pandemic has really turbocharged the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We see that with all of our support, many of our supporters really focusing, on this. It's also turbocharged technology. It's turbocharged this big experiment around flexible work. So, I think our theme for the year was the great reimagining of work, of leadership. And I leave with one of my favorite expressions is Abraham Lincoln's, that says the best way to predict the future is to make it. So we need to take this major change that is happening, that is a once in a generation or maybe in a century change in the nature of work, and carve it into something that's going to help women and everyone thrive.
So is that what you're most hopeful for then?
That's what I'm most hopeful for. And that's what I'm sort of glad that I do my work, because I can impact a lot of organizations. So I'm in a place where I can make impact.
Which leads me to my favorite quote ever. When you say you can make impact, is Maya Angelou said, most people will forget what you've said, most people forget what you've done, but they'll always remember how you made them feel.
That's a great quote. I should remember that every day.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing and being on Leaders Who Care.
Thank you. We enjoyed it.